So go ahead, Javier.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to help very much, but we're going to explore together, hopefully, touch on this give ourselves the chance to reflect on this important human topic, right? And as Ralph reminded us, Krishnamurti, when in 1929 he dissolved the Order of the Star in the East, that was his famous statement of purpose, that he wanted to set man, humanity, human beings, unconditionally, absolutely and unconditionally free. In that same speech, however, he said that no organization and no one outside yourself can make you free. So it sounded like he was contradicting himself. He wanted, this was his purpose, this was the mission of his whole life, to bring about this quality of freedom for the whole of humanity. But at the same time, he knew the inherent limitation of his own task, that nobody can make you free. That freedom is something that comes to us through our own work, through our own action, through our own attention, because it is a matter of perception. Freedom, in the context of Krishnamurti, we have to also define that a little bit, because it's not the ordinary level of freedom that he's talking about. So it might be also significant to just contextualize what kind of freedom he might be talking about. In the passage in the core of the teachings where he talks about freedom, he is just goes along saying what freedom is not. So I wonder how helpful that is. He always went on, freedom is not, love is not, love is not, no, 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 no. Let's go home and live our lives, right? Since it's not any of that. So we have to look at why he's saying this and what might be the meaning of it. But I thought that he puts the passage on freedom within the context of what he has said before. So I read right from the beginning, which is not much, it's another 2 paragraphs of what he said before, because it connects to the original statement of truth is a pathless land. There already he has an inbuilt a notion of freedom. Right? So we'll look at that, and then we'll look at his statement and see if we can find any meaning in it. The core of Krishnamurti's teaching is contained in the statement he made in 1929 when he said, truth is a pathless land. So there we have already the first problem. The truth shall make you free, but there's no way to get to truth. Man cannot come to it through any organization, through any creed, through any dogma, priest, or ritual. He was talking a lot within the religious organization, not through any philosophical knowledge or psychological technique. He has to find it through the mirror of relationship. So there is a way, and it's through a mirror of relationship, through the understanding of the contents of his own mind. So what relationship reflects is the contents of our mind. Through the understanding of the contents of his own mind, through observation, and not through intellectual analysis or introspective dissection. Intellectual analysis may go a certain way, and introspective dissection may also help, certainly. That's why all this questioning and the art of questioning was cultivated by Kay systematically throughout his life. Right? That's part of waking up to the actuality of our lives. But the key is observation. And observation, there you have it again, cannot be done by another. Another can observe very accurately and hold up the mirror, but then we have to still be able to see for ourselves. Otherwise, it won't be true. Then he switches to the content of consciousness. What is this consciousness we're talking about? So he says, man, the content of his consciousness, he says, he has to understand it through a mirror of relationship and understanding the contents of his mind. So what are these contents? He says, man has built in himself images, as a fence of security, as we went through, right? Religious, political, personal. These images manifest as symbols, ideas, beliefs. The burden of these images dominates man's thinking, his relationships, and his daily life. These images are the causes of our problems, for they divide man from man. So the separation he attributes to this content of consciousness, which are these images, these symbols, these ideas and beliefs, which we use as fences of security. These images are the causes of our problems. He says, because they divide, they create conflict, they bring about violence and sorrow. These are the two issues that we're facing as human beings, violence and sorrow. His perception of life is shaped by the concepts already established in his mind. The suggestion is that that partiality of security is also preventing us from seeing life as such, is shaped by these concepts. The content of his consciousness is his entire existence. So the images become the content of our entire existence, whereas an image cannot be the total. So already we have a problem there. The individuality is the name, the form and superficial culture he acquires from tradition and environment. The uniqueness of man, of human beings that is, does not lie in the superficial, that is, in this name, form, and superficial culture of tradition, right? But in complete freedom from the content of his consciousness, which is common to all humanity. So he is not an individual. He brings freedom right here in this second paragraph, where he says that the uniqueness of man does not lie in the superficial, but in complete. He always used total, complete freedom from the content of his consciousness. Now, that means, as he used to say, content is his consciousness. I mean, content is his, consciousness is its content. I put in the cart before the horse. Consciousness is its content. So, emptying consciousness completely of its content means no consciousness as we know it. He places freedom here at this level. Now that's a dramatic, extreme proposal. So normally freedom, just in the ordinary way, so that I'm contextualizing to see where he takes freedom, at what level he applies it. He applies it psychologically, and he applies it totally to the very content of consciousness, to the very nature of consciousness as we know it, as consisting of these images, of these symbols, ideas, beliefs, what he called generally knowledge, not distinguishing what is fictional, personal, or objective scientific. Whatever is the known, he called knowledge. So the consciousness is the field of the known. And he says, freedom from that, from the known, that's what he always talked about, is the uniqueness of humanity, is the wholeness of humanity, is really our freedom. That the limitations that we have are, he identifies this as our intrinsic limitations. And what freedom means, normally even in ordinary language, is that which has no impediment, has no limitation, has no restriction, no constraint. That's part of the meaning. I looked it up in the dictionary just to see what is our common wisdom regarding what freedom means. And I got a few things, right, from the Oxford English Dictionary that I have. Etymologically, interestingly enough, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, freedom comes from the Germanic frijas, I don't know anything about it, but an Indo-European, which is similar to Sanskrit priyas, from pri, which means to love. Etymologically, the scholars, the best scholars at Oxford University, have traced the etymological origin of the word freedom in English through Germanic and Indo-European to a root which is similar to Sanskrit, pri meaning love, priyam means love. So that's an interesting thing. How Krishnamurti, however, in his philosophy, if you want to call it that, in his teachings, pretty much maintains this, which the Oxford English Dictionary somehow confirms. There must have been a wisdom in the Indo-European mind. That's what I used to think. My goodness, the Indo-Europeans were very wise. They knew already that there was a connection between love and freedom, and they had it somehow in their language, right? Krishnamurti, of course, doesn't go on the language, goes on the perception of what freedom means and what love has to do with freedom, right? And he says, yes, love and freedom do go together, right? Like freedom, love, truth, and so on, they go together. They belong to that domain of no limitation engendered by the known. That's where sort of he sees, I think, as I read him, a certain divide. Then normally he says, what does freedom mean? It means release from slavery, from imprisonment, right? The one who goes out of a prison. So if we are in a prison, and a prison can be a real prison or a symbolic prison, what imprisons us, right? So whatever imprisons us denies freedom. That's the normal way of thinking. He is not free from his prejudice. He is not free from his greed. He is not free from his conditioning. He is not free from his aggression. There are any number of things in which we are caught and from which we are not free. We are not masters of ourselves. So there is a certain element of slavery, of being subjected to, controlled by that which is not, we're not free internally to do as we like. We are compelled. We are conditioned. That will be, in fact, I think, the deeper dialectic within K's teachings, that freedom and conditioning are really the antithesis of each other. Where conditioning is, there is no freedom. And freedom means the ending of conditioning. Eventually, he brings it to there. But I guess go on to say what we mean normally. So freedom from slavery, from imprisonment, exception from arbitrary control, right? Independence, civil liberty. We have the word liberty, which is the Latin equivalent for freedom, right? The other day, I have a good friend from the United States, and I made a joke about him. Said, the word freedom is the same as the word liberty. So now suppose that you say, in New York, they have the Statue of Freedom. And it wouldn't enter in his mind. He couldn't. This is the power of words. They mean the same, but you can no longer possibly change the name of that statue, right? It was given to the US for their liberation, their revolution by the French. And in French, of course, they don't have the word freedom, they have the word liberté. So it's liberty. Liberty. So we have it politically, right? So that's the meaning of it, liberty. Political liberty, civil liberty, right? The rights. Being free from control, right? Or necessity, right? We say that if we are subject to necessity, then we are not free. That's another important thing. And it gives us, liberty gives us all kinds of rights, right? We are free to move, free to engage, practice a trade, free to what? Travel, to think even, right? To have different opinions, different beliefs. There is freedom of belief, right? In certain countries. Certain countries there isn't, right? There's just dogmatic imposition. And it generally means lack of impediment or restriction. That's what we mean. But then comes K and says himself what he says freedom means. We already have a pretty good idea of where he's aiming at, what kind of context he's talking about. He's talking about consciousness, and he's talking about the content itself of the known, of the images, of knowledge, opinion, belief, being a limiting factor. And therefore, the emptying of these factors, of this content, becomes the key to freedom. But here is his statement regarding what freedom is. And he's pretty negative. He always starts with a negative. He says freedom is not a reaction. No. wait, I'm already out of place. Freedom is not choice. He starts denying all kinds of things. One of the things that we all mostly value is freedom of choice. That without choice, we would not feel free. So why is he denying it? It is man's pretense that because he has choice, he is free. He's calling us all pretentious. That's a bit much. He said that I'm being pretentious if I think that I'm free because I have a choice. And we have to see at what level we have choice and at what level we don't, right? That's, I think, part of the problem. To contextualize it again. Freedom is pure observation without direction. So he doesn't say you can go wherever you like, do what you like, think what you like, believe what you like. But he says no, freedom is observation. Without direction, without fear of punishment or reward. Now, punishment and reward are the key instruments of conditioning. This is how we're made to function within certain patterns. We're rewarded in one direction and punished in another so that we are kept within the fold. Right? Freedom is without motive. Again, what does that mean? Freedom is not at the end of the evolution of man. We're not going for freedom, right? He says, but lies in the first step of his existence. That's a very mysterious statement. I find it very beautiful, very promising, because if it's at the beginning, then I don't have to be looking for the end, right? I can assume that already somehow is already there, thank goodness. But he says then, in observation, one begins to discover the lack of freedom. So wait a minute, where was it then at the beginning that I've lost it and along the way? Is that what he means? And when I start looking at my life, I discover a lack of freedom. Do I? And if so, what happened to that freedom that was supposedly in the first step of my existence? That takes me back very literally to the first step I took as a little baby, when I stood up and walked for the first time, and my parents applauded. Or whatever they did, I don't remember. So, where is this freedom that he says is at the beginning, but which when I start looking, I don't find? Right? And he says, freedom is found, so it is found, in the choiceless awareness of our daily existence and activity. Aha! Does that connect me with my beginning? See, there is a lot of interesting questions that this little paragraph of his raises for me. On the one hand, freedom is not a reaction. What does that mean? In what way is freedom a reaction? Now he says, if you're in prison, you think of freedom. So that freedom is a reaction to the fact that you're in prison. But that does not make you free. So it is not freedom. It's just the thought of the opposite of not having what the actuality of your life is. If I am angry, I think I should be free from my anger. But that per se does not liberate me from my anger. Right? So that's part of what I understand reaction to mean. You just sort of reject what is happening there, and then you try to find something else. Right? But wait a minute, when you are under a dictatorship, like we have now in several places in the world, right? See, the part of the struggle in the West is not to be underestimated, that the actual political, social, psychological, and cultural dynamic of the West in particular has been marked by the pursuit of freedom. At least that's one of the readings of history, right? That somehow the impetus to freedom has been very fundamental. And that freedom has had to do also with the removal of arbitrary impositions by authority upon the individual, which in any way was always an individual up there, dictating arbitrarily what you should be, what everybody should do, right? And then, of course, we suffered enormously from that, right? The total arbitrariness of power. So we said, no, we have to shift the power to a democratic system where, you have liberté, égalité, fraternité, the three principles of the bourgeois revolutions, the American and the French. So freedom, equality, and brotherhood, at least for the French, which of course went wrong. Brotherhood ended up chopping a lot of heads. But there was the call for freedom from the arbitrariness of power as far as they had lived through it politically with the kings and all those chaps, right? Arbitrariness of the aristocracy. So this was a move, an important move. Was it a reaction? Partly to oppression, right? But wasn't it the right thing to do? Maybe not in the violent way that they did it, or not in the development that happened, but that people really want freedom from oppression. And oppression is just there, coming in different ways. So that is, I don't see a problem with that in itself, per se, that we have to get rid of all these factors of oppression. Right? But do we get rid only externally? That's a real issue. Right? That external freedom doesn't necessarily imply internal freedom. We've had any number of revolutions. I just talked about the American Revolution, the French Revolution, then came the communists, adding further revolutions, right? In Russia and Cuba and China and Vietnam and everywhere else. And there we are. The outer revolution did not change the inner man. So it was a turning of the wheel, indeed, but it ended up in the same place. It ended up in many cases, or in some cases, in more dreadful tyrannies than they had had before. Because it's much more organized, much more dogmatic, systematic. The control was total, right? I mean, what happened in Russia is catastrophic under the Soviets, under Stalin, particularly, right? So we know this. History has shown us that the outer revolution is not inner revolution. It was no freedom at all. It was a promising idea, but ideas don't change man. Per se, there is a change of heart has to happen somewhere. Power has to be let go. Nationalism has to be let go. Human beings have to be valued for themselves and not as mere pawns, instruments of utopian thinking. That the present is more valuable than the future. You can't just sacrifice it to achieve something else. So there is a misconception somewhere in there which has led to all these catastrophes, no matter how carefully designed, thoughtful, helpful, what do you call it? Yeah, utopian, considerate, more than that, even compassionate at some level, because they meant to bring about the world free from all the factors of oppression that capitalism and the struggle of the classes was responsible for. They were aiming at freedom, but they ended up in tyranny. So this is part of the problem. Why we take issue, or K takes issue, with external revolutions and actions to freedom. He feels they are reactions, because they are just within a small field, and it's just a swinging of the pendulum from this system to that system, but freedom is not really realized, because the human mind remains stuck in its good old conditioning, and it doesn't matter what system it takes. It continues to operate within those parameters. It's internally limited, therefore, is a deeper conditioning that the idea does not affect. So reaction is not freedom, or freedom is not reaction. That way, you may have temporary relief, offer a little, but then it ends up in the same place, or worse. Right? Freedom is not choice. That's a major thing. Now, wait a minute. Under a dictatorship, we would have very little choice. So we want to have choice. We want to be able to move freely without everybody state control, without continuous indoctrination, brainwashing, all that. We are just pawns again in the system. So we want to have the choice. That's important, it seems to me, to be able to move about and not be always controlled, right, by a system. not be a pawn, not be a tool, a cog in the machine, controlled by others, that a human being per se has a meaning, has a dignity, has a worth that is inherent to being a human being and cannot be subjected to the system. The system was made for man, not man for the system. I hold to that, though others say otherwise. If I were living in China, I would probably have to shut up right now. Or I might be expected to end up somewhere in Manchuria doing something that I didn't want to do. Maybe breaking stones for the road. That was in the old days. I don't know. Now maybe they make me do, put computer chips in an army factory. Whatever. The slave labor, right? Slavery again. But what is the question of choice? And why is it our pretense that because we have choice, we are free? Why is it a pretense? Isn't it a fact? I can choose. He used to say, oh yes, you have choice. I can choose a blue shirt from a pink shirt when I go shopping, right? Or the color of my shoes, or the color of my suit, or whatever it is, or whatever the color the paint will paint on my wall, right? There are any number of choices that have no further significance. So what kind of choice are we making here? What kind of choice is it? Is it internal choice? Like what kind of choices do we make where we show our freedom? Can we actually be free, for example, from what we are psychologically? When I identify with something, I say, I choose to be a Catholic. Because that religious theory, I don't, but suppose. I actually chose not to be. Having been grown up in it, I said, no, thank you very much. This is not for me. It doesn't make sense. So thank you very much. So I left all that. But suppose, right? A poet, a great poet like T.S. Eliot, he becomes a Catholic, right? Because he feels that religion suits his outlook, his worldview, explains lots of things for him, gives him maybe a certain sense of inwardness that he doesn't find in Protestantism, and so on and so forth. Whatever it was. So choice. Or I'm a communist, because Marx really speaks to me. I am very aware of all this injustice in the world and of the brutality of capitalism that destroys people's lives, exploits them and squeezes them and then throws them out like used oranges. It's a horrible thing. I want an end to it. Thank you very much. Pass me the Kalashnikov. Whatever. You could do that. You'd make a choice. I didn't make that choice. But others did, right? The whole of Latin America, at one time we were all very excited because they were all getting up, picking up the Kalashnikov to destroy that oppressive imperialist ways of the United States and other capitalist systems, right? So they were brave, but also misguided in their own ways. And yet, that doesn't change anything at the end of the day. But you can make choices. Now, what other choices do you make? Can you choose to be free? Can I choose to be kind? Can I choose to be something that I am not? Or there is internally a compulsion in us, already a conditioning that we have to see through, be free from. And is that a matter of choice? The way he used to put it is that you choose only when you are confused. If you are not confused, there is no choice. Now, in what is he talking about? Maybe he's confused about his shirts. Does he only like blue shirts, so he's never confused? Or what is it, right? Or he likes Mercedes-Benz and not Porsche, because Mercedes is classic and Porsche is bourgeois. We're talking about ourselves psychologically. What is it that we choose? In a way, that may have to do with what we identify with, right? What do we identify with? Is that a choice? Right? What we believe in, is it a choice? And is that an expression of confusion? That if we were clear, we would not choose? In terms of action, do I do this? Do I do that? He says, you choose only if you are confused. If you were to see the actuality, you wouldn't choose. But is it that simple as that? what to pose a question to the old boy. Is that as simple as that? Clarity. He says clarity, right? But if we don't have it, what do we do? Right? Because he says action that comes from confusion is naturally incomplete. It leaves always a residue, and therefore we are not free in that action, free from the consequences. The consequences keep haunting us afterwards. To be free in action, to be free to act, is to act so adequately that the action is so complete that there is no consequence resulting from it that has to be dealt with. Psychologically speaking, like if you insult me, what's the consequence? Am I so clear about it at that moment that it does not register, as an insult, and therefore it does not leave the consequence of my having to deal with that insult, with that memory of it, my image of myself, and the consequent reaction to another person afterwards. It leaves a residue. So it's an incomplete action. So the question of complete action has also to do with choice. Where do you act from? But choice has also to do with perception. This is where he brings it ultimately, and that's why he puts freedom perhaps there. That's why he calls it choiceless awareness. He makes sure to put that adjective there, negative, the denial of choice. Why is choice so important in perception? Rather, the absence of choice. Well, how do I choose in perception? So he says you choose by judging, by labeling, by saying this is good, this is bad, this I like, this I don't like, this fits with my system, fits with my image, this does not. So there is a certain distortion that comes in through this so-called choice, psychologically speaking, in observation, that the concept already established in our minds begin to choose according to themselves. They become the observer, and that's what we see. So we see what is already in the concepts established in our minds. If you like, that's the function of, that's the factor of choice. They choose, they identify, they recognize according to what is already established in the mind. That's an interesting thing to see. That the knowledge is not indifferent to perception. The moment it enters perception, it creates its own choice, in the sense of it chooses what to perceive. It perceives according to what is already in its content, and discards the rest, or ignores the rest. So he says that's part of the issue, not to choose in perception. That establishes a quality of factual observation, without which we can't really act properly and wholly. We can't be whole in ourselves either, because our consciousness is partial. Becomes tricky, but it is actually the key, I think, to where he brings it ultimately, as to why choice is not freedom. Yes, let's have choice in the society, in being able to move, in being able to trade, in being able to, you can go to this university or that university, you can have this job or that job, that career or that career, live in this town or in the other town. You can be a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian, a Hindu, a Buddhist, and everything else in between if you want. You can be a communist if you want. Just don't bother anybody. Just carry on. Be free. Be yourself. Don't, cause any harm. But you have all this range of possible identifications and, contents of your consciousness, stances, positions. You'll be free that way. But if we bring that quality of distortion to perception, then we introduce what he said are divisions. They are therefore destructive. They are not whole. And freedom is wholeness. Freedom is because every single identification, every single image fragments, is partial, is necessarily an abstraction, and is small. Therefore not whole, fragmentary. And that creates its own impediment. What is our major impediment? is that we don't see things properly. And therefore, we don't think things correctly. We don't have the right feelings either because they are distorted by the perceptions. And we don't act wholly. Our actions are fragmentary. We perpetuate fragmentation. That becomes the conditioning, and that conditioning denies our freedom. Is one way to put it. Let's put a question mark over it. Is it that simple or that subtle or that it's brought now right now to us at every single point of our existence? Freedom is in the beginning because perception is in the beginning of every single instant of our lives. That's my only way of understanding the statement of hers that says that freedom is not at the end of the evolution of man, but lies in the first step of his existence. Where is freedom in this first step? What's the first step of my existence? Is the last step of my existence. Is this moment now. And this moment now begins with perception. So freedom is in perception. We have to bring it to that almost timeless point in which life has no dimension, no time, no magnitude of time. Is that not freedom? Is that not where freedom is to be found? I leave it as a question because I have problem with that sentence, but I like it. Maybe that's my problem. I make a choice. I do like it. I want freedom to be there, like everybody, right? I want to be free, damn it. Sorry, like I just use swear words. But the sense of, yeah, if it is at the first step of my existence, by Jove, I want it, I like it, I want it here right now. This is my first and my last step. But so therefore, he says, his observation. Observation comes before thinking. It's faster. What happens is that thought is very fast and therefore intervenes very quickly, and we don't even realize that there's a time gap between the seeing and the thinking. Right? But there's the first step of my existence is perception. Perception is always there, is instinctual even to us. It's maybe our only space of innocence, because the rest is experience. In observation, he begins to see his lack of freedom. Well, yes, you begin to see your limitations, right? But if there is already observation, choiceless awareness, he says that you've recovered your freedom. That freedom can help, does it, to liberate us from all these factors of conditioning and limitation, which cause us to lose our freedom, our imprisonment? That's the question, see? Otherwise, Krishnamurti would be trapped in a kind of vicious circle of saying, to be free, you must be free. But you are not free, so how would you be free? There is no how. Thank you very much, Master, but I go and have my coffee now. Meaning, there's no breaking it through, right? But he said, no, there's not like quite that the defeatist, self-defeating an approach. There is a way, but the way is this, choiceless awareness. That doesn't mean that the conditioning is not working, but it is the way of observation that can reveal the conditioning and itself not conditioned because it's not being brought to bear it's not being observed from the past, it's not being observed by some preconceptions of ours, by the concepts already established in our minds. So that potential is really tremendous that he brings to bear across to us. I find that beautiful. The sense of we do have this potential inherent to us to be able to see things without the past interfering, without the observer, with all his choices, what he's called the concepts already established in our minds, which is the observer. That we can observe those contents without the content observing them. That's the only way I have to get around that problem. So that allows for liberation, in that the conditioning can be seen, and therefore, hopefully, put in his right place if he has any. Like knowledge has its place in certain areas, but psychologically it doesn't, nor does it have it in perception. So the choiceless awareness is the space of freedom. See, he when he went on about freedom, he said so many things that are very challenging to our whole culture. And I had a list at one time about those, and I just list them just to as a further challenge to all of us. One was this one of freedom is not choice, but you can see why if we take it to his context, right? In the overall context of society, choice and freedom still have a meaning, as far as I'm concerned. Right? So I'm not accepting him there. But he takes it to the psychological, and there I can see why he would deny choice as a factor of freedom. The prison that we are living in psychologically is the prison of misperception, misconception, and all that. That we are mistaken is our illusions. That's our prison. And that's a prison of time. It's a prison of knowledge. It's a prison of the past. That's why he also denied freedom of thought. Now, wait a minute. Again, there is freedom of thought in as much as you can think what you like. But he says thought per se, being bound to the past, being inherently conditioned, and that's a question as to whether it is inherently so, it's therefore not free. So he denies the freedom of thought, not the freedom of thought in terms of you can think what you like and go on about that, but the thought inherently is not free. So freedom is not to be found in thought. That's a major challenge to our whole culture, or to ourselves. There is no free will. Wait a minute. That's really even more catastrophic for the welfare of mankind. Because we have relied on freedom of will, free will, as the very, how you say, standard measurement of ethical responsibility. If freedom is not, if there's no free will, then you cannot blame anybody for what they do. So how would you put them behind bars? So there is a whole issue there. But he says basically will is desire. And because it is desire, desire is thought operating upon an image. And thought is not free. Then will is not free. It's a logical conclusion, basically. If desire is thought, and thought is not, well, if will is desire, which it is a will, I want this, I will that, is an intended, concentrated form of desire with intent, right? If that's the nature of will, and this thought is behind desire because it is a form of thought, right? Then it's not free. If we accept the thought is not free, right? So there's a lot of challenges in terms of freedom that Kay has in his teachings. I won't go any further. Just to map out the whole thing would take a little longer. Like he also says, there is freedom from, and there is freedom. Now, freedom from, he always talked about it, right? He said, you must be free from fear. That's one of our major impediments. Also from pleasure. Freedom from thought also, because thought is not free. So thought becomes an impediment at certain levels. Free from will. Imagine to lead a life without will. That we don't exercise will. And where thought has its own limited space. Where only observation operates in this other domain. That's why ultimately he says, no, freedom from is still a limited action. Freedom is a state of mind. It's not even from something, though we have to have freedom from all these things, that's obviously, and he even talks about the fundamental freedom of freedom from the known. But he says there is the state of freedom is a state of mind, and that state of mind is an empty mind. So freedom is in emptiness. Silence is the key to freedom. Nothingness is a key to freedom, psychologically speaking. He brings it there. because it's the emptying of content of the consciousness that constitutes freedom, wholeness, psychologically speaking. So freedom, look where he puts freedom. He doesn't send me to the market to choose between a blue shirt and a pink shirt. He takes me right into myself and says, find that emptiness within. Find that point at which you are not the you psychological entity. And if you're free from that, that is the right state of mind, which can be called freedom. And when you're free from any self-centered, from any center of self, then that is also love. That's how he brings the two together, love and freedom, which agrees with the Oxford English Dictionary. All right, let's discuss freedom.
Well, you brought in etymology a while ago, and you've just sort of mentioned it again. And so I had time during your talk to flip open my little etymological dictionary to look up choice.
Aha.
And it's it's not, I don't know, it's not as bad as I think you might have been suggesting, because it says, back to old High German, to test or to examine or to taste. So that rather opens up this, if we say freedom another time, I think we're going to all want to forget about it. But I mean, a while ago, you seem to be expressing for yourself the wish to be free. Whatever that means.
Yeah.
It really, it was about 5 minutes ago, and your whole demeanor seemed to change, and mine did too, just listening to you. So this conditioning that is we call it a prison, to see the conditioning, and also to test and to experiment and to go beyond the limits of the machine that the human being is sort of stuck with. So that's my question.
Yes, well, I wish that the word choice had kept that meaning. I think that would have made more sense, right? To test.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the word, if we keep on using the word freedom, I mean, a lot of people say, Lord, have mercy. They did that for Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. And they repeat that for years, the same sentence. And it may work for some people to keep saying the same word over and over again. It does somehow. And yet, a lot of one's vocabulary is rather restricted. There's kind of a sense that only my words know the truth. That feeling, this word means that, so.
Well, language sort of has a historical development, so it acquires meanings as it goes, and sometimes we lose entirely sight of the etymological original meaning. And nowhere in the English language is the word freedom ever suggests love.
That's right.
I don't think so. But yet, you see, you have sort of that meaning is inbuilt, and Kay, in his examination of human consciousness, comes to see them as inherently bound together.
Right. But the other thing you said was about image and how that is an interference. And then you said we don't see things properly now because of image. So what is that all about? Not seeing things properly. What could that possibly mean?
Right? What does it mean? Well, what don't we see properly?
That's what I'm asking. I mean, do we see anything?
Properly.
Do I see anything properly? Or well, you got me going with that. that what, what would you say? Is
Well, right. It is a key question, actually, perhaps in the whole issue of freedom, as far as Krishnamurti is concerned, because, as we said, he brings it down to perception. He says, freedom is to be found. You see, after he found that freedom wasn't there, he said freedom is still to be found in choiceless awareness, right, of our daily existence. What 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 don't we see correctly? Do we see ourselves correctly?
well, what does that mean? I mean, correctly, do I see?
Not correctly according. Right. No, right, right. The correctly suggests that there is a kind of formula of right and wrong, a kind of already a kind of what do you call it, a standard. But that's not what I mean. To see actually,
Yeah,
the good old expression Kay used, right? To see what is.
yeah.
To see.
What does that mean to see what is?
Okay, now if you look at yourself in the mirror, and that's why we need mirrors apparently, because otherwise we don't see anything. uh, so if we look at ourselves in the mirror, do we see ourselves? Do we actually look for it? That just to begin there, begin at a simple level.
Yeah,
This is the most simple exercise.
yeah,
Well, not exercise, just what we do every day, or what we don't manage to do every day, of seeing one's face.
yeah, yeah,
So in the mirror, the eyebrows, the forehead, the
yeah,
nose, the eyes, the hair. Is it getting thin? And the shape of the mouth, the teeth, what color they are, and all that, the beard, if you have one, and how is it growing, not growing, your neck, how is it wrinkling or not wrinkling? You think of yourself, you're still handsome, not handsome. Are you getting ugly? Or you lament being. So, all kinds of things come into the picture as to what one makes of oneself.
yeah.
Is one able? Is
What do
one
you,
able?
what do you
Oh,
see? What do you see?
well, I see lots of things, but I'm asking what basically the sense of, does one have a sense of objectivity
Yeah,
about just the simple fact of one's own physical reality?
I'm with you on that. I'm just wondering, what about this actual seeing of something? The actual seeing. What
Hmm.
is what's going on in seeing, actually seeing these one of these things that you've just mentioned, the eyebrows, the getting older, just one of them. What is it? What's the experience of actually seeing something? What?
Well, wait. I mean, I don't know quite. I
What did
suppose
you brought it up? You were talking about seeing yourself in the
yes.
in the mirror. So, and then you mentioned a bunch of different things. So,
See,
what's one of these things? What's one
other things. Well,
what's one of these things that you what's one thing that you're seeing? Just one. What is it?
in your own face, you mean, or
In
something?
your face or in my face? You know,
Are you talking about physical seeing? Are we talking about physicality or are we talking about something else?
No, we're not talking. We're talking about seeing whatever it is. I personally wanted to take it on because Kay had this pedagogical thing about seeing, right? And I'm going a little bit along that line of saying, well, have you ever looked at a tree? So he starts with a tree. He loved trees. So can we even look at something so-called outside ourselves with objectivity? In the sense of course, you can always ask, what does it mean, objectivity? You can keep on asking. But can we just look very simply, perceive this object, whatever it is, but we used to call it tree. So I have a tree outside.
are you looking at a tree? You have a tree outside? Okay,
I don't have, well, now it's dark here, it's night, I cannot even see it.
so it's a thought, and it's not looking at a tree. It's a
No, but you see,
thought.
But wait, we're all understanding the words, and we're all understanding the reference, what those words mean, right? So we can all understand what it means to look at a tree, or what the word tree refers to. Your tree may be different from my tree, still a tree. So let's not get too picky, yes?
This is not picky. This is not picky. This is looking at something actually.
Okay, you want to experiment now with that thing.
Yeah, let's do. I think that's where freedom might exist in this experimentation. That's
Yes, but this is exactly right. I think you that is I would take that too. That look, that doesn't it happen? Wait, see if we can simplify it. Yeah, because otherwise we get very complicated. But doesn't it happen that when you actually just your eyes, I'm not saying anything complicated, mystical, or transformational, just with one's eyes, look at something, really look, without instantly bringing in any association. Doesn't something happen there? Don't you get the feeling that no matter how familiar, to begin with, no matter how familiar the thing may appear to be otherwise, it's not familiar. It's new. Because your look is new. No?
yes. I would, for my part, I will say yes to that.
But there we have a beginning of freedom.
I don't know how the others feel about that. You know, everybody's looking at something.
Right.
I think from the view, you know.
Kay then complicates this, yes, but is still maintaining the same level of contact by saying, have you looked at your father? When I was young, I had difficulties looking at my father because I was afraid of my father. So we don't look at what we're afraid of, for example, because the fear is already preventing the looking. But looking is more important. In fact, it may be what liberates you from fear. So I started looking at my father, and I began to see him, not through the already preconception of my father is an aggressive person. I don't look at him at all. We cannot look eye to eye. So to look past all these barriers of the concepts established in our minds, without that, relationship is almost impossible. Because ultimately, the relationship is conditioned. The contact is through the image that has been already gathered in the mind. Prevents direct contact now, the only time of living. Then he complicates it a little more, raises the stakes. Kay is raising the stakes. And he says, have you ever seen a thought, your thought? There you are, to see oneself, not only outwardly as it expresses in relation, but as it goes in the mind. The mind is what we are. This is a total, our existence is in the mind. In the content of consciousness in its movement. Are we aware of it? As it is. Not already also with a conception of what it is, of what I am, what I should be, and I bring that to bear on it. But to be able, likewise, like looking at the tree or at whatever object it is without associations, looking at my father without the memory of his past behavior and my fear, and looking at myself without any preconception of what I am or what I should be. Choicelessly.
Well, I'll tell you this. I sat around a table with some people. We were doing some writing, and we tried a little experiment. We put a flower pot in between all of us, and they said, let's do a little experiment. There are about 5 of us, and we say, we'll just look at this flower for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, and don't think about it. Don't have any thoughts. Just look at. This was in preparation, so we were going to spend 5 minutes just looking, each one individually, at this flower that I had in the center, without having any thoughts about it at all. And the consensus was that it was a little tricky to be without thought, without association, by just looking at something.
Yes, but then is a question of also being aware of the association.
Yeah, but the aspiration would be to let the associations dissipate and go by their way, in order to find out whether I'm really seeing something, or are those associations affecting and preventing my seeing.
Aren't you seeing the associations? Isn't that what you're seeing?
You see the associations, but are the associations preventing the seeing of what I'm actually looking at outside of myself at that kind of situation?
Well, so what's the answer, David? You know,
What's your answer?
no. I mean, you're either, you're not posing it to yourself, or you already have the answer to the question.
I am posing it to myself. Otherwise I wouldn't be here.
Well, so what is it? What do you see when you look at that? You know, are associations preventing you from seeing something clearly?
I'm just going back to what Javier was saying about this aspiration to be free. I felt that in what he was saying, that one wants to be free, and yet there are these little, call them impediments.
Yeah, well, that's the trick of thought right there, because as soon as you aspire, you've introduced time, right? So it's going to interfere. Then you have a problem. You want to be doing something differently than you actually are, which is you're involved in having all these associations. You are all the associations, and like he was saying in the quote, when the observation is happening, you're going to start to perceive the tremendous lack of freedom that's there. You want to look at this flower pot, and yet all these thoughts are coming in, right? So you want freedom to just look, but yet all those thoughts are coming in. So right there, you're starting to learn something, right? Just in that simple, you want something, but it's not happening.
Well, maybe we could ask everyone, and we could share maybe that our own views of freedom, our relationship with freedom. How does that play itself out for us? In what way is it so central or not central to our own lives? We could share that. Maybe that's too broad, but just if one hears the word freedom and one feels it for oneself, lets it resonate in one's own being, if you like, in one's own consciousness, in one's own life. What is there, this aspiration to freedom? And is one struggling with freedom? What is the feeling about it? About freedom?
I think if one is aspiring to freedom, then along what Rob was saying, then one is rejecting what already is. And so one is already reacting. Whereas actual freedom is just when a thought arises, that there it is. And not catching it and trying to dissipate it. feeling I'm not free unless I have no thoughts about things. Thoughts are inevitable, they're already conditioned. So any resistance to them just leads to more conditioning.
Right. It's a struggle. Becomes a struggle.
Do we feel free or not free? I was saying we can't make that call. It's what we are, and we're learning.
I think that we are free until we attach to something. But as you said, it's so fast. The moment of observation to the thinking.
Yeah.
There's so little. Now we introduce time all over again. But there's the thinking and the time. Yeah. That Rob said.
Well, I suddenly feel a little freer toward my relationship with other people's statements. A minute ago, I was slightly braced against other people's thoughts, but now I feel more available in that availability. I feel, I would say, a little more free, just in a simple way. But that's a far cry from what I would call real freedom. It's just a little hint of freedom.
Yeah, well, it gets tricky. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know, I don't want to mess this all up here, but I mean, you're saying it's an intimation of what real freedom is. So it implies that you know what real freedom is, right?
That I suspect that I have a little feeling that if I'm not all constricted and racked with tensions, I'm a little less unfree. That's all. That's all I meant. It's no, huge step. It's just my little happening.
Well, but I heard you saying, David, was simple, I think. Correct me if I didn't hear you correctly, but the sense of if one is able, for example, to suspend, let go of one's own really hard core opinions or beliefs, that which one is attached to. That was what Jen was saying, no? Of we're attached, we get attached, and there we lose our freedom, we lose our flexibility, we lose our freedom of movement internally, psychologically. If I'm too fixed, rigid about my opinions, my conclusions, my experiences, and all that, my beliefs, you can see that that is a lack of freedom. And therefore, I can't listen to other people very well. So that's what you're saying, right? Now, suddenly you sort of feel, absolutely. I have a certain openness now in terms of being able to consider, entertain, not dismiss other people's thoughts. So look, sometimes it's just as simple as that. To have the humility to say, well, it's just my opinion, but I don't, this is just a moment, a partial thing. Why am I holding so strongly to it? I see the effects of that. Makes me rigid. Makes for mental rigidity. And I've got a friend of mine used to say, mental stagnation and hard constipation. Somehow it gets stuck, you see. So the stuckness is part of it. The mechanicalness, the rigidity, the lack of flexibility, the lack of openness. Life is pretty open, if you like. It does have its structures, but on a day-to-day basis, it's a pretty open space. Don't you sense that also? That every second of the day has its potential otherness, is steps over the boundaries of the contents of consciousness. That those are only partial devices for us to manage our affairs, but that in themselves they do not encompass the whole. So I get this feeling that life is telling me every day no concept can encompass the whole. Not even the concept of the whole can encompass it. So that the openness to the whole of life is part of freedom. That's where we find ourselves to be free, is when the wholeness is there. We feel free, for example, when we don't have an illness, when we're not suffering from something, physically speaking. Psychologically, likewise, we are free when the whole thing is functioning healthily together, without all those internal contradictions of habits and beliefs and conscious, unconscious. So that's part of our feeling of freedom, and that every second of the day brings that possibility along, is inherent to it, because consciousness is a continuity of the past through the present to the future. But that continuity may be obscuring in itself a certain discontinuity in the totality that is always self-generated in the present time, in which you can't any longer apply any past or future. There's a crack in the universe in which time has no place. Haven't you felt that? The sense of there's a timelessness now. Time, we have to use it for all kinds of purposes. But time is a denial, perhaps is obscuring rather, the deeper sense of there is a timelessness. There is in consciousness, in the bigger sense of it, no content. There's an emptiness underlying the whole thing, and that emptiness is a wholeness to it. I'm sorry, I'm speaking a little bit.
Yesterday I was with a little group, and before we got started, what we're supposed to do was to be quiet for 5 minutes, and at this particular time, it was my job to set the clock for 5 minutes to be quiet. And I got all worked up because I have a new watch on with a new kind of second hand. And, I wanted to be precise. They said 5 minutes, so shouldn't be 4.5 or 5.5. And so I was really concerned that I make it exactly 5 minutes. And it's not easy to stay with something for 5 minutes. I mean, even watching the second hand go round, which I did part of the time, it takes a long time to watch that second hand go around, right? And what part of the I didn't know what part of the second hand to look at. Anyway, I don't know if this contributes to our conversation or not, but you were talking about time.
Time and timelessness, that this is, I think, the human predicament. That somehow, how to balance those things. Right. At one time, you see, I got very frightened because I was going to die. I thought, it's just a thought. It was just a toothache. It was really just an infection in one of my teeth, molars. But of course, toothaches, they go to your brain. So it's very quick. So the feeling of I'm going to die was so strong. For days on end, I was under the grip of this fear. Now that's time. because I want to achieve something in my life. And that will be the justification of my existence. And we base it on time. Right? But what this thought was saying, there is no time. You're going to die. Death has come and says, no, you're not going to write your book. Goodbye. You had your chance. Now it's over. But in the perception of fear, what lies behind fear? What lies behind fear, in my opinion, the fear of death, is the sense that time itself is a kind of bridge that we build over the abyss, the emptiness of the moment now, to give ourselves continuity and meaning. But actually, in that emptiness, which is a fact, which is just as real or more than time, there is no fear. If you meet the fact of emptiness, which is the denial of time, which is our fundamental freedom, freedom from time, then there is no fear. But there is also no becoming.
Wow.
Nothing to become. I bring that in because, again, it's sort of just an echo of how emptiness, if it's met as a fact, perceived, the discontinuity that underlies all our continuities, necessary as those might be, physically and practically, biologically, in all kinds of ways, psychologically speaking, deep down, perhaps in the very nature of creation, there is not a continuity. It's a creation. The ending and the beginning are simultaneous. When you meet that, you realize that we are, as human beings, operating on these two levels, and we have not yet integrated them properly. That was my feeling, and it still is. It's still a challenge for me to understand the real integration, working together, of time and the timeless. The relative significance of time, because that's part of case thinking, of proposals, that we have invested our being in time. But time is limited, and therefore we will not achieve being through time. Is a denial of the wholeness of being. I don't know how to put it.
Well, you put it well for me, because you use the word emptiness about 5 or 6 times, and one of those times I was really empty, and experientially. So that's important for me, because every word, I don't really hear every word, but sometimes a word hits me in a certain way, and it's like an implosion of, so to speak, and emptiness. So now, next time I use the word emptiness, I might have a different feeling about it. I don't know, but it goes for so many words. These words are charged particles that penetrate.
But this is just to indicate the subtlety of freedom and how fundamental it is, if you like, in our very own existential metaphysics, how it is the ground of our own psychology, how we have to go there in order to understand the deep meaning of freedom. It has to do with time, has to do with the ending of time, and so on, ending of becoming. Right? So we take choice to be in the field of becoming. I can become this or can become that. But that's still a limitation. It's partial freedom, if you even want to use the word freedom at all. But in the end, we're talking about a wholeness that is at the very source of our being, which has to do with creation and timelessness itself. I think that's where Kay wants to take it. To the ending of time, That's what it means to empty consciousness of its content, the total freedom from the content of consciousness. That's emptying consciousness. Right? Is that the emptiness itself? Or just a hollow bowl in the middle of the brain? So the emptiness has a tremendous significance in terms of no object in it, no content in it, which is going to make for a separation. That's what I understand this to signify, even just conceptually, that the content makes for separation, makes for fragmentation, for division. And where there is conflict, there is the denial of freedom. Because it's not whole, it's divided, it's fragmented, it's confused. Freedom goes with order, the highest kind of order, not the order imposed by dictators. They also want order and they sacrifice freedom for it. You can't do that. If you sacrifice freedom, you sacrifice the fundamental ground of order. So they made a mistake, all these dictators. Right? So freedom, where it is, where is the ground of order? What is really true order? And it hasn't be a static order, it can't be a static order. Stagnant formulas, because life is not static. The universe is not static. So we're talking about also bringing consciousness, the mind, in line with the universe. That's our freedom. I'm just moving it a little, try to get it to that point of, see if we can just connect with the lightning rod of intelligence that is in the universe.
Well, for some reason, since you mentioned wholeness, I feel juxtaposing that to emptiness. And this is just by way of experimentation. The wholeness, say, of the body, but not just my body, but the room and my environment. And there's a palpability to this. It's not just intellectual, but it's partly intellectual. It's very, I would say, vivifying. And it opens, for me, the question I brought up earlier about can I see? What do I see without thinking? Yeah. Thank you.
I think there's there's a lot of sort of confusion around this whole thing because it's easy. Well, I know I certainly have over many years is thought that this freedom, the state of freedom, is somehow permanent, and it's really the liberations are happening, or they do happen on a moment-to-moment basis. It's like there's a different way of interpreting this, that even to die to some conditioning in a momentary sense, just the perception and then the dying to that conditioning, there's freedom right there. But there's no need to bring the notion that it should always be there. It's the liberations are momentary, and that takes care, well, it has anyways for myself, a tremendous problem, because I don't worry about it anymore if I'm caught in conditioning, or if the thought is moving or whatever it's doing. It's just what's happening, you know. But it takes a lot of the stress or the, I don't know what the word to use is, but it's just like small things are just as significant as large things, you know. To die to a small desire, or to have a small desire arise and then fall away, that's just as significant as something, you know, that we might call much larger, because it's the same quality that's operating. And so, well, that's how it is. It's just little steps. It's all that's necessary. You don't need to make it into a big thing. And we all know those little steps. It happened for us all, right? You know.
That's a big thing that you're saying about those little things.
Yeah, I've been sitting here with things coming up to say, but not saying them. So maybe I can just take a stab at it, at what I'm seeing as we talk about this. Choiceless awareness, to get back to that, seems to be the basis of all of this, because that's the perception. Like if I'm observing, if there is observing, I have to get the language right here. There is observing, then what is it that's observing? You know, that what is observing seems, as I enter into it and actually observe, there's a kind of sense of entering into that which is observing, right? And that goes on and becomes deeper as the observation happens. And that thing which is observing is empty. Like it's emptiness. There's no way of defining it. There's no substance to it. So that emptiness becomes more in the foreground as one practices, or whatever you want to call it, as one observes. That which is observing comes more into the foreground, and that has no, it's space. It's just like space. And I think Javier, you were describing it that way too. It's the emptiness. And then that becomes the background of everything. Like everything that's arising in consciousness is arising in the emptiness. And the emptiness is, there's awareness of that emptiness. So then I'm resting in awareness, so to speak, or resting in emptiness. And that's freedom. And that's happening moment to moment. Like every moment, there is this emptiness is always present. Maybe that's a big thing to say, but it's always present. But it seems that as long as I pay attention, any moment that I pay attention, this emptiness is here. It's noticed. And it's the background, it's the space that everything is happening within. I don't know. Maybe that's enough.
Sure. Anyone else who has been sitting there thinking lots of things and has not had a chance to say?
Yeah, I mean, the whole discussion has been very confusing somehow. I don't know. You can also easily fill your consciousness with Krishnamurti theories. And then you can talk out of that and sort of and look at things and judge things out of his theories, sort of. And this is just another theory in the consciousness. Or I mean, what you talk about there, David, wasn't it that it is space, that there is that you get some kind of feeling of space in when you meet things that you don't like, and you get oppositions from people who are whatever, and you meet the life somehow, and you can see it in a different way. Then you can see your own thoughts somehow rising, and then it's in emptiness. I don't know, was that what you meant, sort of, a little bit? But I mean, all of us, for example, here, I guess, has some preference about food, whatever. I like this, I don't like that, whatever. It's not so easy to just taste without having any kind of preference, sort of, which we often have. I mean, and I don't know even if it's possible to do like this, to sort of, to have a big Krishnamurti theory that you shall come outside of consciousness and just look at things real. And you really, and try to do that. I don't know, really. I mean, it's easy to become plagiat or a little bit confused way of being if you play with it too much. Also, one has to be very careful. I mean, it has to happen, I think.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
I say.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I guess where I really agree with that is in your question, Javier, when you said, like, what is freedom for everyone? I feel like I really pause there because it's a very abstract thing to me, and I can almost feel my mind like kind of getting in gear. What is freedom? Like, come up with an answer in a way. And I almost don't know what to do with that. I feel like, oh, I gotta stop that, you know, and find freedom instead of a definition. And then I come back into my mind again. But if I shift into the kind of what you mentioned in the beginning, okay, the mirror, look in the mirror, observe, that feels more immediate to me. That feels almost, I can just be and something will arise.
There you are. See, it's as simple as that, perhaps, you see. To just observe in the mirror, the one in the bathroom and the one in relationship, and the one within in consciousness as it moves. It's also that mirror. And then, as you know, we're all saying, it's easy maybe to just get also caught in a theory, and it's a matter of experimenting. Like David said, that's the real meaning of choice etymologically. Test it out. Taste it. Taste the nature of our own being. That's really nice, isn't it? When we are creative, we have a taste about our lives. A perfume about our lives. And it's not just external, it's also internal with how we are. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good invitation to all of us, a good reminder that we have to go beyond the words.
There's also this internal mirror where we can see in which we can see our reactions to events, to situations, relationships, and so on. And just seeing that can be is it possible to see these relationships from a sense of, from this spaciousness or emptiness that you're talking about, or that you're pointing to?
Or pointing to, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like anyway, there's I think we went actually quite deeply into this question of freedom and what Krishnamurti may have meant by it and what it may mean for us. And hopefully there'll be something that we can take with us from it. So thanks everyone for joining us this time, and we'll hopefully perhaps see you again next time in a month. Thank you, Javier.
Not at all. Thank
for,
you.
for being brave enough to bring up these issues and questions and explorations that are important and not easy to facilitate.
No, there are difficult issues and subtle issues, but I think important ones. And of course, we do our best.
We're leaving just when the great question has pervaded me, but I guess I'll have to hang on to it till a month. Hope I remember.
Yeah, write it down maybe on a piece
Yeah,
of paper.
bring it up next time, David.
I wanted to acknowledge my quietness, but to say that I've been listening very closely. And I'm really with the idea that freedom is a psychological state.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I'm sitting with right now, just to say it, put it out there. And looking at it through that idea of it being a psychological state, it certainly opens up a lot of avenues of investigation. There we go. Thank you. Yeah,
No,
thank
you. You see, you pick up on something central, and that's the important thing.
you.
These conversations, whatever really touches us as being significant ways to further investigation. So,
Very much appreciate it.
no, thank you very much.
So thank you again, everyone.
Okay.
Keep well.
Yeah.
Take
Thanks,
care, you guys.
Thanks for that love. Yeah, bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good to see you.